In 1826, a prominent Freemason in upstate New York signed a publishing contract promising to reveal secrets of the Masonic initiation.
And they essentially throw him in a carriage right off into the woods, and Morgan shouts out the window, "Murder!" as they go off into the sunset, and he's never seen again.
William Morgan was born in 1774 in Culpeper, Virginia. As a young man, he found work as a bricklayer and stonecutter. He served in the army during the War of 1812 and claimed the rank of captain. Some historians have called into question whether Morgan was actually a captain, as no official military record of his service has ever been discovered. Nonetheless, his service was not in question among his friends and associates at the time, and they addressed him as captain in written records. In 1819, Morgan married Lucinda Pendleton in Richmond, Virginia. In 1821, the couple moved to a town called York, near the area of Canada now known as Toronto. It was there that William Morgan owned and operated a brewery. It was also there that he allegedly became a member of the secret fraternity known as Freemasonry.
He places his right hand on the Bible and with his left presses the point of a compass against his chest. He swears to forever conceal and never reveal any of the secret arts, parts, or points of the hidden mysteries of Freemasonry. If he breaks that promise, he binds himself to having my throat cut across, my tongue torn out, my body buried in the sands of the sea at low tide. The new brother has entered the first grade of Freemasonry. Above it are two more, fellow craft and master mason. Each has its ritual oath of secrecy and prescribed horrible punishments.
So what is Freemasonry? Simply put, it's the world's oldest and largest fraternity. Its membership a who's who of world history. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Winston Churchill, Mozart, Davy Crockett, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Houdini, Gerald Ford, Henry Ford, John Wayne, even Colonel Sanders.
Formally, Freemasonry is a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. An operative Mason is someone who actually knows and works in the trade, a real Mason. Accepted, also called speculative Masons, are men admitted to lodges without any intention of actually laying bricks or stones.
Freemasonry began in medieval Europe as a guild for stonemasons, but lived on as a social organization.
1717, the first Grand Lodge is created in London. And now there are many men in these lodges that are not associated with the trade organization. They're gentlemen masons.
They're not stonecutters.
They're not stonecutters. And so something has happened. A modern fraternity has been created.
The widely accepted belief is that for some inexplicable reason, stonemason guilds began accepting non-working members. Over time, the accepted brethren, mostly wealthy aristocrats or tradesmen, became dominant and the real Masons dropped out. The problem with this scenario is that no one can really say how, when, or why it happened. Why would rich guys want to pretend to be common workmen? And why would guilds admit a bunch of dilettantes? Clearly, no one had any real idea when and how Freemasonry began. The blank canvas made it possible to paint in almost anything.
Freemasonry and the ideals that went into the American Constitution and the Declaration of Independence have an awful lot of overlap.
There are even some people who argue that the United States, in its creation, in its inception, even in its constitutional order, was a Masonic republic.
Freemasons account for 2 of the 5 committee members who drafted the Declaration of Independence, 40% of the generals during the Revolutionary War, and 30% of those who signed their names on the U.S. Constitution.
The Freemasons insist they're just a civic-minded fraternity, bound together by secret and elaborate, but ultimately harmless, rituals.
William Morgan's status as a Freemason has been disputed by historians and contemporary Masons. but Morgan claims that he achieved the third-degree rank of Master Mason while living in Canada. Though his brewery in Canada was apparently a success, after less than 2 years, it was completely destroyed by a fire, leaving Morgan and his young wife in poverty. The couple moved to New York, where Morgan resumed his previous trade as a brick and stone mason. During this time period, his wife gave birth to their 2 children, Lucinda and Thomas. His family lived briefly in Rochester and then settled in Batavia. In New York, Morgan continued his involvement in Freemasonry. In May of 1825, Morgan received the Royal Arch degree at a lodge in the nearby town of Leroy. Soon after, William Morgan signed a petition to establish a Royal Arch chapter in Batavia, New York. Many other members disputed Morgan's membership and his status as a Master Mason, so they created a new petition for the chapter, leaving him out. Morgan later tried to join and was rejected. At this time, Morgan decided to publish an expose of the secret fraternity, including specifics of its rituals and initiations. In doing this, he was violating the oaths taken by all Master Masons not to divulge these secrets. Morgan enlisted the help of a newspaper publisher named David Cade Miller. By the spring of 1826, the two had entered into a publishing agreement for a book that would be called Illustrations of Masonry.
When Morgan announces he's going to tell all the secrets of Masonry, some of the guys in town decide to take their Masonic obligation much more seriously than they really should have.
David C. Miller, the newspaper editor that had helped Morgan through the early stages of publishing his book, well, his newspaper shop was attacked and almost burned to the ground. Morgan, however, he faced even more backlash from the Freemasons. He faced a series of dubious charges. The first being that he stole a shirt and tie from a fellow Mason in Batavia on the day of his son's birth.
On September 11, 1826, William Morgan was arrested and held at the Ontario County Jail for the alleged crime of stealing a shirt.
To his contemporaries, many of the charges levied against Morgan, they seemed to be fabricated. After spending some time in jail, a judge, looking at the evidence, acquitted Morgan of stealing a shirt and tie. But that wasn't the end of his legal troubles. Just a short time after being released from prison, he was again accused of a petty crime. This time from a fellow Mason from Batavia that said that Morgan owed him $2.68.
On the night of September 12, 1826, Morgan was again released from jail, this time by a group of Masons.
The Masons in the area around him, they do all sorts of things to try to stop him from trying to speak to him, to try to burn down the printing press. And eventually they turn to kidnapping.
He was taken against his will to Old Fort Niagara and was never heard from again.
As the carriage pulled away, a witness heard Morgan cry out, "Murder! Murder!"
Shortly after the disappearance of William Morgan, a body washed up on the shores of Lake Ontario. Now, this body, it was confirmed to be Mr. Morgan by none other than his own wife. However, that's where the story gets a little bit interesting. Even though the body had already been identified by Mrs. Morgan, just a few days later, a Canadian woman stepped forward by the name of Sarah Monroe, claiming that her husband, a local fisherman, had also died and that the body was actually his. The story of William Morgan and his body soon became national news. An American public that already distrusted Freemasonry, well, they now had another reason to distrust this secret society.
Eventually, the 4 Masons who abducted Morgan were put on trial and convicted of kidnapping and holding Morgan against his will. The sheriff at the time, a Mason named Eli Bruce, was also convicted on conspiracy charges. All the men served light sentences, ranging from 1 month to about 2 years. Several other local Masons were tried and acquitted.
As the wheels of justice turn, they don't turn very well, because Masons seem to be trying to cover this up. You have Masonic sheriffs packing juries. You have Masonic organizations seeming to try to remove witnesses from the area.
When the defendants were let off with light sentences, a public outcry erupted. Even DeWitt Clinton, the powerful governor of New York State and Freemason, was suspected of conspiracy.
After William Morgan's disappearance, his book was published by David Miller, and became a bestseller. News of Morgan's disappearance created an anti-Masonic fervor that swept through the United States, culminating in the formation of the first third party in American politics, the Anti-Masonic Party.
George Washington had been a Mason. The sitting president of the United States, Andrew Jackson, Democrat, was a Mason. Henry Clay, the nominee of the National Republicans, was a Mason. So the feeling was that here's this secret group all these people who were controlling the government belonged to.
People said Masonry has too much power, and it's irreligious, and there's too much drinking, and they have all these regalia and fancy titles. That's unrepublican. And it's secret. In a republic, everything should be out in the open.
Americans come to see Masonry in a new way. What had seemed to be the embodiment of everything that was right about America now seems to be the embodiment of everything that's wrong about America.
Over time, anti-masonry steamrolled, and it was really the first mass movement, and very much a populist mass movement, and the first third party in American history. What other political party originated in a kidnapping and a murder?
By the time of the presidential campaign of 1831, a burgeoning anti-Mason movement had coalesced into a powerful political force.
The anti-Mason party was not on the political scene very long, but they did leave us with one innovation, and that is the presidential nominating convention. Up until the 1832 election, you had a system where members of Congress were selecting the next president. They would take a vote as to who the parties were going to run that year. It was a very unpopular system because it gave the people no voice in selecting presidential candidates. The anti-Mason movement, which just started and had only a couple of members of Congress, could not have a caucus because it would not be a meaningful thing with just a few people in the room.
This is a mini election within the party, deciding here's who we're going to put forward to run for president. That hadn't been done before.
The anti-Masons lost their presidential bid in 1832 to Andrew Jackson, a Democrat and a Freemason.
The party eventually dissolved as its members joined the emerging Whig Party. By the 1850s, the Whig Party became absorbed into the newly formed Republican Party, founded in opposition to slavery. What exactly became of William Morgan after his disappearance remains a mystery to this day, and there are conflicting accounts of what took place. In 1848, a man named Henry L. Valence confessed on his deathbed to participating in the murder of William Morgan with two other Freemasons. He said they tied weights to his body and threw him into the Niagara River, where he drowned. A Masonic author later claimed that one of Morgan's abductors, John Whitney, told him they had paid Morgan $500 to flee to Canada with his family and never return. Other Freemason publications later spread unconfirmed rumors that Morgan had been seen alive in other countries. Despite a lack of definitive physical evidence, most contemporary historians agree that Morgan was most likely murdered by overzealous Freemasons. Though the public reputation of Freemasonry was badly damaged by the Morgan scandal, the group had a resurgence in popularity a few decades later. Today, membership is on the decline once again, down roughly 75% since its peak in 1959, and steadily falling. Freemasonry claims to be a harmless men's social club focused on charity and the self-improvement of its members. If that is true, why would the group have any need for its members to take a vow of secrecy, punishable by a gruesome death?
In 1738, Pope Clement XII issued the first edict against Freemasonry. He condemned and prohibited Freemasonry now and forever. As Clement saw it, the Freemasons' obsession with secrecy condemned them. For if they were not doing evil, he reasoned, they would not have so great a hatred of the light.
It is human nature to be suspicious of those who keep secrets. Life experience teaches us that people of good moral character have no need for secrecy and no fear of transparency. But when an elite organization keeps secrets and uses violence to protect them, most of the American media implies it is somehow irrational to be suspicious of such an organization. In September 1882, the National Christian Association, a group opposed to secret societies, erected a monument to William Morgan in Batavia Cemetery. The monument referred to Morgan as a martyr to the freedom of writing, printing, and speaking the truth. Was William Morgan murdered by a rogue group of hot-headed Freemasons? Was his abduction and probable murder put to a vote and sanctioned by a local lodge? Or could there be some other explanation for William Morgan's disappearance from Fort Niagara in September 1826? What do you think? Follow the links in the description to learn more and decide for yourself. Please leave your thoughts in the comments.